also have in-house the participants in the technical session on data sets and tech tools to explore gender-nuanced reporting. The session was coordinated or moderated by Ajibola, Deputy Director, Journalism at CJID. And we had Joshua Olufemi, founder and publisher at Data Fight, as a part of that process, and of course, Stephen Idoko, Programs Manager, Inclusive Friends Association, also a part of that. I think that, yeah, okay, they're here. The group, the technical session on regional approaches to addressing corrosive capital is the last to join us here. It had a fewer number of persons participating. I'm sure they had a very corrosive session because they brought up the rear. They've been there for a while. You know, when it has to do with money and corruption issues and all that, tempers can fly. But I think they've done justice to it and would have the opportunity of sharing what their views are later on. So we thank Mboho Eno, Deputy Director, Accountability at CGID, who moderated that session, and of course, Benedict Daw of the Ghana Integrity Initiative, Juliet Aloha Uka Nwosu, who represented Uche Igwe, the visiting fellow from the London School of Economics, and of course, Godwin Akpa, the Professor of Economics at the University of Uyo, we thank you. Bakari Majid, the journalist from Premium Times, we also thank you. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are on the final lap for today. We thank you all for your time, for your patience, and for your participation. It's been a very exciting session, I want to believe. So now we'll go on to another panel session, this time on advancing gender transformative norms through media reportage. And our moderator is Esther Alaribe, who is a broadcast journalist on Women Radio. Let's put our hands together for Esther Alaribe. Thank you. See the resounding applause for Women Radio. Thank you. Thank you, Esther. And we also have the panel of discussants. The Chief of Staff to Big Cabal Media. This is an exciting name to bear. Big Cabal Media. But it's media, so, so even if they are Kabbalistic, we know how to navigate them. So let's welcome Anita Eboigbe. Thank you. You are the Big Cabal lady. Big Cabal. Thank you. We also have the founder and publisher, Data Fight, Joshua Olufemi. Thank you. He was most resourceful at the discourse on corrosive capital a while ago at the technical session. Thank you. We're happy to have you here again. Let's also welcome the Africa Editor Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism, Ajibola Amzat. Thank you. Thank you. I don't cut eye for somebody. Thank you. Dr. Jumoke Adeyeye, who is a gender scientist, International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, IITA, is going to join us online. All right? So we're good to go, right? Okay, so let's shoot. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Esther Alaribe, broadcast journalist with Women Radio 91.7. And this conversation this evening, I like to call it Saving the Best for the Last. Yeah, that's what I call it. So if you attended the technical session on gender, you would know why we need to have this conversation. And I really hope that you've been enjoying the conference as much as I have been doing, because having to listen to different panelists, different speakers, it just gets to remind you of some things that you think you know until you actually engage other people. You can't hear me. Okay, so can we hear me better now? Okay. Oh. Okay, so maybe I'm just used to the studio mic then. So this conversation we're going to be having, talking about advancing transformative gender norms through media reportage. In recent times, I have seen a lot of change from media platforms in the way we get to report women. There's been a lot of changes in the way that media platforms are more intentional in organizing trainings, workshops, to actually tell reporters how to report women. I like to refer to the RUSH model, that is report until something happens. Motorai Olaka is somewhere from, she's somewhere in here from the Wale Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. And my CEO, Jumoke Adeyeye, likes to call it RUSH, report her until something happens. Now we want to ask ourselves, how intentional have we been as journalists in reporting women? Do you just go to invite women on your programs or in your publications as resource person because you just want gender balance? So that people would say that, yes, I have two women, I have two men. Or is it because you actually want to hear their own side of story? I like to say that at Women Radio 91.7, we allow for women to tell their stories undiluted. And how are we going to be intentional about doing this? And I'm glad that we have an amazing lineup of media experts this evening who are going to be telling us more on how we should and how we can intentionally report women. There's some things that we've come to know over time that have become our societal norms. They're not normal, but this is what was handed over to us. Sometimes you even want to ask yourself if this, okay, fine. So I hope this sounds better. Okay. So I'm glad that we're having this lineup of media experts who in their different spaces have been able to use their platforms to actually find ways to ensure that gender mainstreaming is a thing. Now you want to ask yourself certain questions. When you look at top media organizations, mainstream media, how many women actually own media platforms? Just think about it. How many of them? Now look at the managerial level. How many women actually hold decision-making positions in these offices? You want to ask yourself again, not a lot of women. And this is what it means, whereby you have a reporter go out to go cover stories, or they want to write something about women or something, and there's an editor there who doesn't understand what the story means, because your editor might not necessarily be doing it intentionally, but he doesn't connect to that story. It is not his reality. Same way we get to see in the political space that women are not adequately represented. You don't expect a man to just understand what exactly you are on about. So at this point in time, I will start off with Anita Eboigbe over here. Yes, Dr. Jumoke Adeyeye, we can see you. I hope you can hear me clearly. All right, great. So I'll start off with Anita. Tell us, when you saw this topic, what came to mind first, and how over time you've used your platform to actually ensure that media reportage on women is something that is brought to the fore and these stories are told undiluted.
Okay, so I'm hoping that you can hear me. Good afternoon or good evening. When I saw this topic for the first time, I was like, oh my God, gender again. I know that that sounds bad, just like, but oftentimes I'm very used to people setting up gender panels so that their events feel balanced, right? And so whenever I find an invitation and it's gender, I want to investigate. And I know I reached out saying, what exactly is this supposed to do, right? Can you hear me? Okay, fantastic. So I remember just being like, what exactly are we supposed to do with this topic? What's the goal? Why are we having this conversation? And it's CGID, so it makes sense. There's always depth. Nobody's trying to fill a quota in that sense. So you've asked, what have I done over the years with newsrooms? I was managing editor at Human Angle, and a lot of the stories that we covered for conflict required us to talk to women. So when you look at the humanitarian issues that are happening, women are at the forefront of these issues. And a big thing that we needed to do was to make sure that the newsroom was balanced. So we had people who were actually going to talk to women that had context. So for instance, if you're going to cover women in northern Nigeria, you needed a woman who was from northern Nigeria to cover it. Because I'm from the south, and when I would go on the field sometimes, you just have context that you don't understand. I think that's the one thing, just getting women to cover areas where they needed to cover, but also making sure that there was a female editor to edit the stories. Because it's not like we don't trust that men don't know English, or like when the stories come to meet them, they won't know the punctuation to use. It's that we understand that situations have nuance, right? And when it comes to the way that women suffer, because there are two types of reporting women. There's reporting women when they are suffering, reporting women for enjoyment. And then if you add another layer, there's reporting women when they're in danger. So that's where like the wahala has not happened, but it's about to happen and you're in a situation where that should happen. And you find that when men are covering it, they always feel like the story is not complete if you haven't added what the woman did to deserve it. It's usually very subtle. And I have come to realize that there's not malice involved. There are people with whom there is malice, right? But like with a lot of men, there's no malice involved. It's not like they're bad people and they hate women. It's just that they just can't understand how a woman will put herself in a precarious situation. So you mean that you saw that people were gathering there and you went to go and stay there. So when he's editing the story, a lot of that comes up. And you find that the editor is asking you, so they just raped the woman like that. Like, it's funny. Like, should they just rape the woman like that? Go back to your source. Go and ask more questions. And a female editor is asking, how is she feeling? Right? What happened when it was happening? Who did she reach out to? These are different questions that different people are asking. And not because one person hates the other person, but because context and nuance matter. So throughout just me heading newsrooms and leading media organizations, I always just want to make sure that the people who have the right context and the right nuance to edit and report a story have access to do that.
Thank you very much, Anita, for that. So I'm coming to you, Ajibola, on this. As individuals, we all have our unconscious biases. That sometimes, as a journalist, you want to cover a story, or you even have the story before you're trying to edit it. And somewhere in your head, you're like, I would use a classic example. This example, let's say we're talking about a sex worker. A sex worker gets raped, and your editor is like, so what's the difference? It's what she does on a normal day. What makes it different? There is a difference because consent was not sought. So how have you been able to take away your own biases when telling your story and actually having to pass it down to your reporters, your colleagues, making them understand why this is a thing? It's not just about you telling your story, but you're telling the reality of somebody who has experienced this scenario.
That's a very tough one, Esther. So how did I handle some of those stories? Well, I think I've done some work in the past about women, because I know that as an editor, I'm going to be reading all kinds of copies. So I was privileged to have done a lot of readings on feminine literature. So that gave me some kind of context about how not to report women and all that. And I try to also suggest that to some of our reporters. But you see, Anita made some points. Men and women, we don't see the world in the same way. I think it was a guy called John who wrote the book about men are from the Mars and the women are from the Venus. Yeah. John Gray, that's the name of the guy. And he was just using Venus and Mars as metaphor. What he was actually saying is that we don't see the world from the same lens. And therefore, if you want someone to really report issues with the kind of context that is right, you probably need a woman to do that kind of reporting. But unfortunately, the issue in the newsroom around here, it's very, very problematic. So much that we don't have so many women in the newsroom that can do that kind of reporting. I work in an organization where we're about 15 staffers, and more than 70% of us are women. We're at 15 years, about 10 are women. Only 4 of us are men. I didn't even see that in the beginning until later when I was looking at the number of the staff. Okay, wait a minute, how did we end up having just 4 men in this newsroom and 10 women? But you see, when you go through some of the stories that we do, you can see the pattern, the stories, the kind of story that we tell. It shows that we pay more attention to women issue. So it starts with the topic and the narrative. But again, I also worked in a newsroom where about 80% of staff were men. The only few women in that newsroom were married, so they're like men as well. and the other ones married to the editors. But again, when you check the content of the kind of stories that is being produced by that news organization, you also see that pattern. I came here with a small statistic. When I was coming to this event, I did a quick check on the homepage of the Nigerian newspapers. Guess what I saw? On the Vanguard newspaper, on their homepage, the images on the Vanguard for today, check as I'm speaking, there are 10 men that were visualized as a front page photograph on Vanguard, 1 woman. The Guardian, 10 men, 0 women. Punch, 10 men, 2 women. In fact, one of the women was a UK Home Secretary of the United Kingdom that was sacked by the PM. That's the only story of the women that you saw in the. For this day, you have 10 men and 2 women. For Premium Times, 10 men and 0 women. So, and there are a lot of data because when Joshua was speaking the other time, Joshua read out some data of how women are represented in the media. And you can see that this is likely to be continuing because until we begin to change the demography of the newsmakers in the newsroom and the gatekeepers, I will leave it at that.
Interesting panel, isn't it? Okay. So I'm going to Joshua next. I know that at Data Fight, when it comes to data, we're very particular about data. And really, I would say that as a country, we haven't really done well with data. Somebody, if you want to look out for data on a particular subject matter, you're probably going as far back as 2018, 2019. What happened to 2020? So I would want for you to talk about the need for us to make data on women across different sectors available and how we can now translate this data into understanding the areas that we need to organize trainings for media reporters on.
Thank you so much. So you've twisted the question, but I thought you were going to ask me the same question around how we use the work, but I probably will take it from where I stopped at the last meeting. And I'll start by saying almost every data set that you have in the country would have some context around women or gender. So where to start from is if there is agriculture data, journalists should look for the gender component of it. If it's not there, ask so that there will be. A colleague of mine from John Hopkins saw me this afternoon, and I was almost going to enter the ground. There's a data set she's been asking for almost, I think, 3 to 6 months now. Wanted Data Fight to get it for her. Guess what it is? The disaggregated gender data of the high neck results, or I think is it results or voters. So if you had an election and you can't even disaggregate the data by gender, how do you then go to, other forms of, inclusion data like people with disability, or other social, economic or social demographics? So the important thing is when the data isn't available, you then start to highlight it as journalists. So that's the first thing. The second thing, one of the things that we have done is to support journalists with crowdsourcing or even curating the data when it's unavailable, or helping them to then find or extract whichever one is gender related within every other data set that you will find. And we started in 2020, and this was during COVID, and we realized that everybody was reporting every issue, and there wasn't so much about how COVID was affecting women and the girl child. And that was when we launched the first Gender in Nigeria data publication. That was like the first publication that we launched. It was intentional to say, how can you have such an important, challenge in the country and nobody's even looking at it from how it's affecting women? Of course, we saw a lot around, people, being sexually or violated or, physically abused during the period, of course, for various reasons. But we thought that there were also important things like the media literacy level, ownership of land, other rights and privileges or freedoms, if you like, that women are either undervalued, underrepresented, or even not captured at all. And that was why we did that. Then we took it forward in terms of training by 2021 to ask ourselves which media, genre, or if you like, form would be important to really reach women. Of course, we've always done is the electronic media, right? Radio, TV, and what we did was to then, we started a fellowship, which we call the Gender Mainstreaming Fellowship, and we're, supporting or resourcing broadcast journalists with data to do their work, but beyond the data, to ensure that they were mainstreaming gender into every, of their programming or content. I think by now we will have done 15 fellows, and we'll have trained about 75 broadcast journalists who we thought, the print can always sort themselves, right? Because there are other ways, of course, but we feel and I would think at our last count, the 15 fellows, 10 now I think, sorry, I like to always fact check my numbers, we probably have reached over 60 million of the Nigerian population. So if you assume that you have about 49 to 50% of that population being women or female gender, that means we'll probably have reached 30 million with issues and we ensure that we had more women reporting those issues. So for us is taking every socioeconomic and political data, extracting that part of it or component of it that is gender or even people living with disability, and then providing that data to journalists to use it to tell stories. I was excited just to end this when one of our fellows reached out to us, I think it was last week, and was asking us for data on albinism. I'm like, wow. Even I would think that I've been so much ingrained in DI that data would be important to me. But until she asked for that data, I then saw, this is even another level of data we should be thinking about, right? How is this important to every socio-political policy or intervention of government? So that's one of the ways that we go about finding the data, accessing it, providing it from a place of insight, and then resourcing journalists and other civic actors to use it for policy advocacy and accountability work.
All right, thank you very much, Joshua. Dr. Adeyeye, can you hear me? You can hear me clearly?
I can hear you.
All right, great. So, as a gender scientist, what would you recommend that media platforms adopt in ensuring that we have more women telling women's stories, and that media platforms allow for their reporters, their journalists to tell their stories? Because there is one issue of the reporters being willing to tell their stories, and there's another issue of the platforms actually allowing them to tell the stories. So what are the solutions that you prefer to journalists in the room this evening?
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you very much. This is really a very good question.
Okay, so we're struggling to hear you. Media, please help us out. Or you can increase your audio from your end. Okay, in the meantime, while Dr. Adeyeye is trying to sort that out, I'll just come back to Anita. So now let's talk about the need to actually equip female journalists. We need more female journalists to come into the sectors and tell their stories themselves. When we attended the technical session over there, Joshua said something, talking about the last election, the 2023 elections, how many female journalists actually reported women. And I'm actually thinking, I recall during the elections, I was going from the Nigerian Women Trust Fund, I was going to INEC, going to different platforms and different organizations to gather data. But one would think that this data would actually make it to the mainstream media. But not a lot was done. So we need to talk about the need to actually equip female journalists to be able to tell their stories.
I think that would be like asking children, empowering children to go and fight their parents, and I will explain. I think that it's a top to bottom approach. We've tried, there are several initiatives that look at training women to tell women stories, and then the women go to the newsrooms and they are pitching the stories, and the editor is like, what's this, right? This doesn't make any sense. That's one. On the other hand, I don't know that anybody has ever sat me down to train me how to tell male stories. Why don't I need training on how to tell a man's story? Why don't men need training on how to tell male stories, right? I think that overall, people are always going to report what they know, but in the hierarchy of the newsroom, editors are always going to greenlight what they understand. And so if you have majority of the people who are editors as men, what you do need to let them understand is why certain stories matter. And when it comes to reporting women's stories, one of the reasons why I'm very, very not pro separating gender issues is that it's not only when bad things happen that we remember that we're supposed to be reporting women's stories. One of the reasons why when you did your analysis of front pages, right, and you found that they were not reporting women, is because really we only remember to report women when bad things are happening. So like somebody is sexually assaulted, oh, it's a female gender story, so a reporter in your office is going to pursue it for months. Somebody was beaten by the husband, it's a female story, so a reporter is doing it. One woman was out of a sea of women who do things every day. One woman that you mistakenly encountered at an event, you found out that she did something, so you assign a female reporter to go and report her. And it's so interesting because at every sphere of life, women are doing stuff. And I think it's pretty like how the way that the Nigerian economy is set up, women and men do stuff all the time. So how do we equip people to cover stories and cover them with depth? That's the place that is missing, really. And what this means is that when you're in your pitch meetings in your newsroom and somebody is pitching a story and you've listened to 10 pitches, 11 pitches, and nobody has mentioned something that is women-centered, you should ask the person whether they stepped out of their house that morning, or whether they listened to something, or whether they follow world news, or just whether they were living real life or touching grass. Because at the end of the day, what we don't need to, like, it's not the programs that are asking women to go and cover the women that you are creating a bottleneck. You're creating a very, very qualified person to cover an issue who is going to meet an obstacle later. So number one, you need the editors, the entire newsroom, to be trained on what exactly stories are, how to identify these stories, and how to spotlight them regardless of gender. Now, because people already have a blind spot for female stories, you now need to shine light on that blind spot, right? And it's not by carrying women to one corner, it's by carrying the entire newsroom and asking them to identify what the stories are. So good stories, bad stories, normal stories. If a man is going to get featured because he, I don't know, caught a rebound somewhere, balance it. Show me a woman who also caught a rebound somewhere and put it. It's not when it comes to female stories that we do the whole 10-step verification of how important is this story. How important is the story that made the front of the newspaper today? Those are questions that we don't ask. Like, why do you really, really, really need depth? Why is it that when it comes to female stories, that's when your editor will ask you to go back 10 times? These are the questions. It's not the, that's another thing that you mentioned earlier. When we all start off, we start off with more women than men in the newsrooms. Everybody knows this. And we lose the women at middle management. So by the time that everybody is becoming an assistant editor or an editor, there are no women in the newsrooms again. And I found it very funny that you called the women who were single like men. Because the moment that women marry in the newsrooms, even without the women changing their characters or changing their schedules, we change it for them. And it is not a woman who is doing it to them. It is the male editor in the newsroom who is doing it to them. Who is saying, madam, go home. Your husband will soon be looking for you. When I was at the News Agency of Nigeria, 2 people will get married inside the newsroom. They will give the man extra assignment and ask the woman to go home. And I remember asking the editor one time, and he said, because the man needed to provide now. We carry all of these things into the newsroom. And then when the funnel gets smaller, we start asking questions like, oh my God, Wole Soyinka Center, come and train women to cover women. But the truth is, all of us, only. So I will end there.
Okay, so at this point in time, you probably want to start thinking back. Just picture your newsroom in your head and think, how much have we been doing? So there's something that the BBC adopted. It's called the 50-50. And the 50-50 project is an intentional way to ensure that women's voices are represented. So if I'm speaking to a man on any issue at all, environmental, economic, or anything, I have to be sure that there is a woman there. Because we just assume that when it comes to conversation around climate change, politics, business, it's a man. But women go to the market now. Yes. Look at a lot of the big advertising brands. It is the woman that will see this advert and tell her friend, let's buy this one. And she would influence her husband one way or the other to buy that same brand. But when we're talking the money issues, we're facing the men instead. So now, let's talk about the need for media platforms to actually adopt the 50-50 approach and ensure that women's voices are represented across different conversations.
Esther, I hope your solution works. I truly hope it works. But considering where I work at the moment, I don't think that's our own approach. And we're still able to get more than 50%. I think the people who work with us, first, we didn't even see gender. I don't know if anybody, but I don't think anyone sees gender in my place. Everybody, you came in because you come with some competence, level of competence and exposure, and because you can do the job. That was how you got in the first place. So it is not because you're a woman or you're a man. And that's how we could have a situation where 70 to 30% happened in the CCIJ where I work. So perhaps saying that let's put a quota on it might not be the solution that is sustainable. I think in Nigerian context, it is the workspace environment that makes it very difficult. Because again, let me go back to where I work. In my place, you don't have to resume to work at any particular time. Everybody has their own work to do. You do it at your own time, but you have a deadline. But you choose the time you are going to do it. So you're not stressed to come to the office. I mean, by the way, everybody is scattered across the globe, so we don't even have one. Most of the office we use is virtual. But coming back home, the newsroom that I work with here in Nigeria, you realize that you probably have to resume to work like every other person. 9, 10 o'clock, you go and cover your beats. And then you come back to newsroom like 3 to 4 p.m. in the evening. And then you work from that time till like 10 p.m. Anyway, the place where I worked, we used to leave office like 10 p.m. And my wife is here. She knows that. I hardly came back home until like 11 because I would do another 3 hours in the traffic in Lagos. So usually I came back home around 12:01. The situation in the newsroom does not make it convenient for any woman to function very well in that kind of newsroom. So, and that is what the media owner in Nigeria are not thinking of. How can we make a space that is convenient for women to work? So that if you say that I'm having cramps or I'm having my period, you don't have to come to work, you can still do your work at home. Or if you're pregnant, you can just do your work from anywhere you are comfortable to do it, but you don't have to find your way to the office every day. Or when you eventually give birth to your child, you don't have to come back to work after 3 months, or you can do your work anytime, and you're still not going to lose your pay. So I think until we begin to think of how can we create a space that will allow women to function as a journalist, that is when we can begin to attract more women to the newsroom than the other way around. When I was in the university, and I think Anita mentioned it, no, it is not, when we get employed in the newsroom, we don't have more women than women. It's always more men than women. But in the university, in my home university, I studied Mass Communication University of Lagos, we're about 70 in the class. More than 50% of us were women. In fact, they used to call my department Ilubeni, because most of my friends from other departments, they would come to Mass Communication to go and find girlfriends. Because, there were more women than men. But guess what? After graduation, no one wants to do journalism. Because by the time you now see the conditions of newsrooms in Nigeria, you don't want to be doing 9 to 10 every day. So those are the factors that actually prevent women from working in the newsroom. And women, they don't think for themselves alone. When a woman is thinking, is also thinking of her child or an unborn child. That, okay, this work, how would you allow me and my baby to, function very well? So all those kind of things, men hardly think about that when they are taking options of working. So those are the conditions that newsroom need to be, mindful of before they, set up a situation that will allow, high representations of women. Putting quota on it, I doubt whether it's going to work, because if you say, okay, 50-50, come to the newsroom, as long as that condition remains, you just see some of them actually resigning one after the other, and you're still going to get back to 9 to 10% ratio. That's my view.
So when I was talking about the 50-50 project, I was looking at your publication, your content, what you get to churn out, the resource persons that you feature, 50-50, ensuring that women voices are heard as well. Yes, and I hear you say that these issues having to do with the media, yes, in recent times we get to see organizations that can afford it have creche for their new moms. Then you get to see functional facilities for persons with disabilities and all. But the media hasn't gotten there yet. And a lot of people, when you talk to a lot of media owners, they'll tell you it is funding. There is no money, which is another conversation entirely. And really, I agree with the fact that when you go to mass communications department, really, it's women. But as they come into the labor force, they start to drop. You come to the managerial level, you've probably seen just one woman. And because the ties are not just favorable for the woman to stay in the job, again, female journalists in the room, this is your story to tell. I'm going back to Dr. Adeyeye. Can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Right. Oh, great. Yes. So I was asking you earlier, as a gender scientist, what would you recommend to media platforms on how to intentionally come to know? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
That we've come to know, how would you best advise that they begin to deconstruct them and tell more women's stories?
Yes. Thank you very much. It has really been very interesting listening to all the panelists. In fact, I was thinking, these are the issues that we have been talking about, as gender experts that work across different fields to ensure that, gender is adequately integrated. And when two of the panelists were talking, I said, this is the issue of mainstreaming gender into the organization. We are talking about how do we make the media to have good representation of women? How do we portray good image of women in our news, in our reports, in our current affairs? But everything starts from the institution, because there's a common saying that you can only give what you have, and charity begins from home. So from the institution needs to, as you have said, to be intentional about their efforts to make sure that women don't drop out. Look at what our brother that finished from University of Lagos said. So many ladies, when he was in maybe undergraduate, but getting to the professional field, they were dropping out. And that is what we call the leaking pipe in professional field, that you see many women at the base, But as they are going up, you begin to see them, you know, dropping and dropping and dropping. So what is the factor that is making women to drop out? We need to identify these factors and we need to intentionally address it. You know, we cannot say, okay, it is not conducive for women, the environment is not conducive for women. The media institution, media organization, we need to start to develop strategy. How many media institutes or institutions have gender workplace policy? How many take gender into consideration in important issue, in recruitment, in promotion, you know, in having enabling environments that can accommodate different categories of women, single women, married women, you know, wealthy women, not too wealthy women. We have to look at women from different categories because even women group is not a homogeneous group. We have different categories.
Okay, so since we lost connection with her, but she was trying to make a point talking about the institutions and having to enforce gender policies. Really?
A story, you know, story from women journalists. We have to be intentional. We have to make mainstream gender from the institution. It has to start from there. Charity begins from home. We have good workplace policy. We have anti-sexual harassment policy. We have gender strategy. You know, talking of issue of training and capacity building, we talk about how do we incorporate women into it. And then, you know, one of our panelists said, you know, the language that I use, that men and women, they do not see things in the same way. Yes, men and women do not see things in the same way, but, you know, men now, they need to begin to wear what we call the gender lens. Everybody needs to start wearing gender lens. And, you know, looking at, you know, our work, whether in the conceptualization of the work that we have, or in even reporting and presenting our work as journalists, we need to start looking at it from gender perspective. And we have examples from different institutions of men that have become role models, of men that have become gender justice champion, even in the organization. And, you know, they are working to make it happen for women, to push women, you know, to make sure that they don't drop off, they don't leak out of the path, and they get to the, you know, the top or the topmost place of their profession. So I will stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. And yes, just like she has said, big kudos to the he for she's in the media industry who have consistently pushed for more women. Actually ensuring that women journalists get the capacity building that they need and enforcing it in their different organizations. Yes, you cannot say that you are trying to empower women journalists to stay in the business of media when you don't have a gender policy in your organization. You don't have an anti-sexual harassment policy in your organization. You don't have this. You don't have an open-door policy whereby when issues that concern women, when it happens to them, nobody just discards it. It actually gets talked about and people address it. So yes, I'm glad that we're having these conversations this evening. At this point, the floor is yours to the audience. I would be taking 3 questions from the audience. I can see we have so many hands up already. So we'll just take questions. I'll ask for you to help out. 3 questions, straight to the point, and we'll take it to the... Oh, 2 questions. Oh, 2 questions. Fine. 2 questions.
We have to be gender sensitive. Don't worry, we'll come. Tell us your name.
Okay, my name is Zainab Yetunde Adam. Excuse me, please, you still haven't answered how we can bridge the gap of this late hour closing from work. For example, I understand the fact that we usually hold editorial or postmortem, but I think we can do that maybe on Mondays and allow the women to come to work whenever they feel like, or work virtually. But still, how can we bridge this gap so that it will be flexible for the women, especially Mr. Ajibola?
Okay. I would...
Do we take the questions from here
let's,
and then
let's
you
take
respond?
it one at a time so that
We'll take it one at a time? Okay,
it
let's
will take
just take
time.
another
Okay,
one.
let's take the question then. Yeah.
I'm asked to take one.
Just one more.
So, you know, now woman born me, and now woman be my wife, and a daughter be my daughter.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thank you. So, all right, so I work in the media house. Okay, Ayola Kasim, I work with Channels Television. I'm head of programs there, actually. So you're saying that, okay, I sit amongst men. And for some strange reason, when people talk about their editorial meetings and all, I think we are not as many as the men, but we are many. So you look to your right, you see a woman. You look to your left, you see a woman. And then when we are talking, and there's this, we mentioned nuance. There's this nuance when they talk, as if some of us were there because they're trying to be gender balanced. And we're like, no, I'm sitting down here because I've paid my dues. And they know that I've paid my dues. But what really gets to me is when they're making it sound like as if we are telling this story because, women think. And that's what I'm sensing from your conversation. And I'm like, no, because you want to do gender balance. Let's tell the story because it affects human beings. We are all human beings. Okay, I came here today because yesterday was the election and I have to be there. And then Silas is here and some other people. I called them, I have to be apologizing. I've asked them to come. But Nigerian, and we do our things different way. There's nothing like planning or anything. So this Bayelsa, maybe they finished the collation now. They kept us waiting the whole day yesterday. So we were there. We don't even know what the thing. Just imagine me calling a woman, please, can you come in an hour's time? Do you know what they're going to tell me? The history of my life. Because they will tell me, oh, why are you just calling me now? I didn't know it's going to be like that. So I think as women, we need to start changing our mindset like, this is what we want to achieve. Not because I'm a woman. That is what we need to do. And I think that's where we're getting it wrong. I'm sorry, we're supposed to support one another, but that's the challenge we actually face.
Okay, so I will take it that was a comment and
not
a question, which is fine.
Thank you. So it was a comment, so you need one question?
Yes, one more question.
I think this time around, I will give it to a man. I don't try. I must... gather voice. Can you imagine?
Thank you. Yes. Abina from the University of Ghana. I have a question, but we'll proceed with a bit of a comment because I've made a similar argument in a panel before. And somebody said something that really struck me that, you know what, enough with the attempt to fix women. Women have been being fixed to do gender-sensitive journalism for a long time. But if you listen to these ideas being shared here today, there are structural problems that go beyond the woman who should report women. There are newsroom socialization problems that privilege a man's lens when looking at what is news. We need to deal with those ones over and above the woman reporter who needs to be fixed. And so my question for you, and I ask this as somebody who works in a women and media-oriented organization, what should we do to get media owners, media managers, gatekeepers within media to begin to see the relevance of these conversations and why it matters to them to pursue change? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That will be all for the questions. Our panelist Joshua will take the first question, talking about. Oh, you. Okay, so let's just take one. Just one.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to say that what we're dealing with here is more of gender socialization, not just in the newsroom, but in all spheres. And I would like to take it back to the domestic sphere. So you see, the challenge that the female journalist deals with in a newsroom is from the socialization that is coming from the home front. it is the socialization that is coming from how we have raised girls as different from boys. As long as we have socialization that ties women down to bear burden of care, to bear the burden of nurture, and we continue to reinforce the idea in men that they can take over the world and become providers. Women do not have places as, breadwinners, as providers. We will continue to not only have shortage of women in the newsroom, but the journalists would also continue to report women as lesser human beings. So I think that one lesson we all should live with here as journalists is that first we have to reorientate ourselves about what gender equality really means. And in simple, clear terms, I would say gender equality just means human beings are different, but they are equal. So we accommodate our differences, accept that we are, yes, different, but we are equal. And then we begin to seek equitable approaches to bridge the gaps in our differences. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your comment. So we'll just answer the questions. Panelists, Joshua will take the first question, talking about balancing late work and the demand of the job. Then panelist Anita will take the question of the media owners and having to strengthen this institution to ensure that the way we see women outside, we don't bring it into the workspace.
Thank you so much. I think I'll speak as someone who sees everything from the place of evidence and data. And I'll say, perhaps it's time we have, data to drive this conversation. Can we have an ethnography of a woman's day, right, and a guy's day, and put that in front of any employer, right? Can we just kind of put that in front and say, this is how a 6 a.m. to 12 midnight is for a woman, right? And the same for a man. And then you start to see that perhaps we'll be able to easily make that case, right? That's one. The other is, if we're really looking at the media, I guess it's time we also start to color. Maybe we use green, amber, red to show, what he just did now, right? Every newspaper got his own color, right? I think it's time we find an intervention, and I don't know if Montreal is here, big sister. Okay. So maybe one of the things we need to look at is, let's even start to give a color to how newsrooms either report, cater to issues of women, or, and then we can then say this amber-colored platform named Datafied. Maybe that's also one way to begin to incentivize the process, right? Because there's no other way to get those news editors or those publishers to have a reflection if we are not using knowledge to drive the conversation, right? We can all say what our big uncle just said now, oh, now woman born me, now woman be my sister, now woman, right? But I'll end with this. When you go to the airport, when you're coming in the morning in your bus, look at the proportion of men and women, and then be able to answer the question she said. Do you think all the women that when you go to the airport, probably will see 4 to 1, right? They show 1 to 4, or even maybe 2 to 10 passengers are women. Not that the other 8 women don't even deserve to be there, but their responsibility, there are things in their life that will not make them be at that place. And Kevin, they said something to me. He said, you also see that the 2 women you will see, most of the times are accompanied by a man, or they are accompanying a man. You see the point? So you've got to be able to understand the ethnography of how a woman's life runs, and then it helps you to begin to then say, we can socially construct something that is inclusive, and has diverse, context in how we either report or how we make the place even allow women to think of this. Because it's a simple thing. If you're a reporter, right, how do you report? Right? The issues around you, right? So why is it that every issue around you is about a woman, but you don't report it? Right?
All right. I think your question is looking at the media owners and how they can get behind the program. All right. So, I mean, a lot of what he has said around showing what is possible, but after you finish showing, like, how do people actually take responsibility from there? A big thing is that a lot of the ways that stories are pitched and selected in the newsroom is flawed. And it's flawed because a lot of newsrooms do not have they don't have clear markers for selecting the stories that they want to cover. And this is even beyond like gender issues. I don't know if any of you have had an experience where you open a newspaper and you are wondering how the news even got there in the first place. Like, when did, I wanted to call one now, when did so-and-so newspaper start to report this kind of issue? And it feels like it's so out of place or it doesn't belong there. So when you trace it back to the way that the stories are pitched and the way the stories are selected, you find that there are no clear markers. And that's what distinguishes a lot of our local newsrooms from international newsrooms. If you've ever freelanced or written for an international newsroom, you will see that the process is different. The way that we decide the way that they decide what stories to cover, the way that they decide how many people to talk to, what makes a good story, all of that is different. And that's on the story perspective. So we need clearer models for how we pick stories. So if you're going to pick a story, key factor should be, why is this story relevant? I mean, 5 W's and H and all the C's of communication that they teach you when you're in mass comm class. But like, why is this story relevant? Why should we be covering this? Who are the actors in the story? And the like. And almost everything in life, the actors in the story are both men and women. So it doesn't make sense that when you're eventually covering it, only the men are represented. Media owners need to figure out what is the best way to streamline the process of picking stories. That's one. On the other end, just so that I'll stop there, there is also the factor of media owners figuring out how to treat the women who work in the newsroom. When we mention treating women who work in the newsroom, people always assume that we want to give women preferential treatment. But there's a reason why the word equity exists. Equity says that everybody should be treated, everybody should be given the room to grow depending on their capacity and depending on like how they want to contribute. So if you have women in the newsroom, and I'm looking at a lot of media owners in the room now. Some of them are putting their head down, but but if you have women in your newsroom, who you should have in your newsroom, what you want to figure out is how would they do their best work. I find that this conversation is often had with male journalists. Like, someone will tell you, our guy called me, or he asked me, now that I'm married now, how will I be doing this work? Nobody called me. Nobody's asking me any question. Everybody just assumes that either I'm going to slack off the job soon, or in fact, from the day you will even marry yourself, people just assume that very soon you will leave. So you have to make provisions and actually sit people down the way that you want to retain the men in your organization and make concessions for them. Because women, don't let them lie to you. They make concessions for men in the newsroom. Do you know that? It's not that the men are just going to do it because they have superpower. They make concessions for men in the newsroom. I have led newsrooms. I have made concessions for men. And so if men are going to get concessions made for them, you need to be able to demand those concessions, and they have to put it in place. A big part of being a manager is understanding how to make sure that the people who work with you are fulfilled and they're in line with the vision. If they're in line with the vision and they're not fulfilled, something is wrong somewhere. So that's the homework for media houses today.
All right, thank you very much. I really wish that this conversation could go on because there's so many questions I know from the audience that we would have loved to answer. But this is all that we can take. And the interesting thing is that conversations like this do not end here. We will go back to our different media platforms. Let's go back to our different newsrooms and actually dot the I's and cross the T's. Ask yourself the pertinent questions. How much more do I need to do? As a manager, as a media owner, look at your members of staff, look at the data and see what you can do. But all the same, I think this panel has been an amazing one, having to address these issues. Thank you so much, Ajibola. Thank you, Anita. And thank you, Joshua. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you very much. And, okay, please. Yes, please, the doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Adeyeye. Thank you very much.
Dr. Adeyeye. All right, thank you very much for that. This session could actually go on. And a special shout out to every man and every woman who's making this happen. Because even as we talk about the women, we're also mindful of the fact that the men are in the room and it's a collective and inclusive process. We can't empower one and leave the other because somehow they would get to meet in the future. And so we don't go back to that cycle.
Thank you.
Thank you very, 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 very much. Esther and the crew, thanks a whole